really driving home the idea of not doing anything half-assed and making sure that one person in the process fully owns and is committed to making that project as efficient and profitable as it can be, because all of these things are really simple. These aren't major tweaks. They're really simple.
What's up, everybody? Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkost here with another episode of the Big Picture Blueprint, where today it is just Dan and myself, and Dan really is going to be the star of the show. We're going to be talking a lot about new construction and how to avoid making mistakes that can really put you in a very, very bad position. But before we dive in, Dan, how are things going on your end?
Man, I'm the busiest I've been in a long time. We have so many properties under contract and projects we're working on, and yeah, so I'm busy. I know you can relate to that.
Yeah, same. It's hard to just keep track of everything. And this is not a sponsored post, but my wife and I bought one of those. We got targeted Facebook ads for the Big Ass Calendar, which is just like an annual calendar. It's like 5 feet wide. We can see everything for the rest of the year. And it's funny because I'm like putting a bunch of due diligence stuff on there, in correlation with vacations and life events and stuff like that. But it's you got to stay organized and got to stay on top of things, and make sure you have all your ducks in an order for every aspect of life, but in particular with new construction, because things can go awry very, very easily, no matter how well you plan. So I think it'll be kind of a good lead in now, Dan, for talking about new construction.
Sure. So just to give everyone a quick overview of what we're talking about, I had two spec homes, one of which just sold. The other fell out of contract. The buyer got cold feet. We're out of time on the construction loan, so we're just refining and renting it. It'll rent easily. It's just not a very good return on the amount of cash we have in it. Um, and it's funny because we did so many things wrong. Even though I'm not new at this, I've been doing been doing these projects since I was learning in 2018, and got a little lazy, got a little complacent, and just doing the same sort of plan and process I've done for many years. And they were just kind of in the back burner where I did these with a partner, and he and I both weren't prioritizing them. So lots of little things got missed and not really owning it. And so at the end of the day, we made $3,500 on the one, which is terrible. And then again, the other one, we'll have some equity in it, and it'll be, it'll make a few bucks a month, and I think we'll sell it down the road. But there are so many things that would have easily been fixable, because if we were to start these two homes again tomorrow with a few tweaks, they could be quite profitable. And so that's what we're going to go through, is all the mistakes made that led to this. The positive of it is we still didn't lose money, given how much we left on the table as far as design, time frames with the construction loan, etc., and how it's applicable to projects in general. I know Mason will have some input on projects he's done and is doing that. He's made some of the same mistakes. So hopefully you guys can learn and not make them yourselves. So let's start with the financing. So we bought these lots in Pueblo West, Colorado. I had used a hard money lender for years, but the partner I was working with and I decided, okay, let's actually use a local bank. They're tedious to work with. They're slower, higher down payments, but let's use a local bank so we get a much lower rate, much lower origination fees, and save quite a bit on the interest. And I have one that I have a relationship with. I have some lines of credit and have some accounts with, but I didn't really love them. So we thought, oh, we'll try this new one. I forget how we even got in touch with them. I think he did. And in long story short, we got strung along for a long time, where we thought this guy was the decision maker. His higher ups kept telling him, well, we want this documentation, then we want this, and we just got strung along. And after 3 months, he still couldn't get it originated. And at this point, we had bought the lots, we'd done the plans, contractor had the permits, we're ready to start, and we're like, this is ridiculous. We need to start. And so because we tried to go with the new lender we didn't have experience with, we ended up having to jump ship at the last second and just use a hard money lender, which was even more expensive than many we'd used prior. And so that was our first big failure, is not having the lender 100% solidified. We thought, oh, this guy's going to work out. but we were wrong. And then this was ended up being a huge mistake. I'll share the numbers at the end, but we paid way too much in interest and origination because of this. And so going forward, we will not be doing this unless we are 100% sure, okay, we're set with this bank and ready to go.
So do you think like there's a lot of different categories of money that you could use for new construction, and a lot of people are totally afraid of debt, totally afraid of leveraging. If you were to rank, from private financing to, more institutional bank to small community banks, hard money in a particular order, how would you rank them?
Well, they all have their pros and cons, right? And a lot of it depends on your contractor's time frame, which we'll get into contractor expectations and what you're doing with the property. But the best scenario, the best rates you're ever going to get are with a community bank that you have a relationship with. If they have done business with you, they trust you, you have someone there that you know personally, and you have a strong balance sheet, you can get the lowest fees. I mean, a lot of times half a point origination, and interest rates just a little bit over prime. Technically, you mentioned private financing, and with a private investor, you can get whatever you negotiate. So in theory, you could get an even better deal with a private lender, but probably not. We did actually end up using a private lender for this, but it equated to hard money rates. So I would put a local bank at the top of the list, but you do need more money down. So I'll caveat that without
And what
running the risk.
documentation do you need to be able to even, uh, like, qualify for one of these banks? Is it based on your personal financial statement? Is it, just the project that they're looking at? Is it, are you having to put up other assets against the loan or anything like that because there's not actually any structure on the property yet to kind of secure against? Or how does that, like, the actual semantics of it work?
All of the above, especially if it's a new relationship. So expect to send your personal financial statement, expect to need accounts with substantial reserves, depending on the bank, expect to need the land probably plus 20% down. Some of these banks might include the land cost as part of your 20% down. Many of them do not. Expect them to look at your tax returns for 2 to 3 years. So yeah, all of the above. But the beauty is once you have that relationship and you've done a few loans, it does get easier. I have since then developed a relationship with a bank that's refied a big land project in Colorado. And on Friday, I called the guy. I needed a line of credit off on a rental property. He goes, "Yeah, uh, I can do that for about $500 origination and half a point above prime and appraisal." And so it gets much easier once you have the relationship. Um, but starting right, assuming that you don't, they're going to want to see all of the above plus some sort of deposit account.
What about experience of, a lot of lenders, especially like specifically on the hard money side, they're like, tell me about the last handful of projects that you did. What did those ones look like? Are you doing that with a bank as well?
Yeah, 100%. They're not just going to give money to someone that's brand new. If your contractor is experienced and you can use that and say, "Hey, look, I'm just ultimately the investor here. I bought the land. My contractor's done this plan 20 times. They're the experienced builder." That can work too. But expect your contractor to have to show that to the bank, and they need to be cooperative with you and the bank, or it's not going to work.
Perfect. Let's rewind just a little bit, Dan, because this is really how you got introduced to land investing as a whole with, your mentor out, down south. And what did those first couple projects look like? Of what was your role in those? So for people getting started, where you might go to your local real estate investor association meetup, or you might be networking at a home builders association event or something like that, or just talking with someone in a coffee shop that's, a gray beard still doing projects and, needs someone that's young and hungry to help out. What did that look like kind of at the very beginning? Were you structuring these deals the same with these banks, or did he have, all the money for the construction or?
Yeah, so he was using a local bank, and he had a whole bunch of lots. And when I first went down there, he already had some specs in process, and he gave me yeah, we went into one of the spec homes that was completed. This was 2018, so the market was normal. It wasn't the frenzy of the pandemic. And so it was completed and it wasn't sold yet. And realtors were walking through and he was having open houses. And anyone that's walked through a home that's had a lot of realtors through it will find a stack of business cards. And he hands me the business cards. He says, "Call these people." see if any of them had clients that liked the home or almost liked the home, but wanted a different location and or slight changes to the home. And so that's what I did. And I found one that liked the home, but they wanted the living room 2 foot wider to fit their couch, and they wanted a larger lot. And so I got that guy to the table, or the realtor and his clients. And what do you know? We had, or my mentor had a larger lot. We expanded the plan 2 foot, so they could accommodate, or so it could accommodate their couch. And I helped put that together, and then got to follow along the whole way, see how he financed it, and see how it was built. And that was the very first one I was involved in. And so in that case, it was a pre-sale, and he already had a relationship with the bank, so all that he had to do was put up the land, and the bank financed the construction 100%. However, don't expect that when you're new. You've gotta have a relationship and a system set up.
And so with a pre-sale, is it the end buyer? It's their financing on the project, or is it you as the builder's financing on the project?
I always did it where it's the investor or the builder, because it's tricky if the end buyer is using their financing. Well, the whole process is gonna be held up by the end buyer potentially doing or not doing what they're supposed to do to get the draw request processed and approved. And so I would wanna keep that in my name as the, technically developer. That's a big word for small spec homes, but technically the developer. Um, and then that end buyer has to put up a non-refundable deposit in order for us to start the project, right? Because they need to have some skin in the game, so that they don't just run 6 months or halfway through construction. And so the down payment is the key there.
Yeah, great points right there. And, people will hear terms like pre-sale and they think that just because the home is pre-sold or something like that, they've already been paid by the end buyer, and
Mm.
that's not quite how it works. And even if you're doing it for yourself, I mean, my parents had to go through a bank whenever they were building their new home, and every time there's a change order and a draw request, and I mean, the bank is continuously, releasing funds, which they charge a fee on that too. Uh, just be thinking about really understanding the numbers
Mhm.
that go in with any of these financing solutions. And we're going to get into contractors here in a little bit, but just understanding all these little fees that are going to come along the way that you need to really anticipate.
Yeah, 100%. So, all that to say, I think the moral here is just don't have this don't start the project thinking, "Oh, we're good with this bank," if you don't actually have the approval yet. Make sure that you're there and you're ready to close before you start. When you're new, especially when you're new. If you're down the road and you have a long-standing relationship with a bank that's funded deal after deal, okay, that might be different. But we were trying a new lender, and we thought, oh yeah, we're almost there. He told us we're almost there. So let's start the permitting process and pay for that and get my contractor ready to dig and pour the foundation. And then he didn't come through. And so that was the problem. One more thing I'll say on this is one of the big differences between hard money and traditional banks is going to be timing. A lot of traditional banks will give you a year and a half on the loan, which is just really nice because it helps to bridge seasonality. Where, I'm looking at this one that fell out of contract, and it's like, man, it's February, interest rates are near 6 for the first time in a while. Colorado, the market's picking up. We're getting tons of showings, but we just have to refi it now because the loan's due next month. And if we had gone with a commercial lender, if it had worked out with that guy or would use one of the other ones I knew, we'd have more time. We could spruce up the house a little bit, do a little better job on the landscaping, and I'm positive we could sell this higher than we have it listed right now. We just messed up, which we'll get into quite a few things, and now we're stuck timing-wise because the loan is up next month. And so if we'd use a commercial bank, we'd have more of a window, and we could spruce it up and sell it in the busiest time of year. But now we can't.
So, what one more question on financing from my end. If you were just super liquid, like you had $5-10 million in cash just kind of sitting around, would you still use bank financing to do these deals, or would you just do it all cash?
Definitely would use bank financing because you can get the 6-ish%, 6.5% rate. So the opportunity cost on that does not make sense to do cash. Unless, I mean, it's somewhat of a personal question. So that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, makes sense of, if you can, and it is a personal question. I think everyone is going to be dogmatic in their thinking with something like that, but it's all of these points we're talking about. They are all eliminated whenever you're just paying out of pocket, cash for something like this. And then if you end up having to keep it, you can't sell it. You just refinance out of it at, whatever rate. And then you're saving a lot of money on all the different bank fees and stuff like that. But so less stress if you have just a tremendous amount of liquid capital. But if you have 300,000 liquid and your new construction you think is going to cost 290,000, and then you have what always happens, very rarely happens is your project is under budget.
Mhm.
So all just different considerations there. At the end of the day, it's a personal choice. But I think, Dan, you hit the nail on the head with local community bank that you can, even if it's a new relationship that you're establishing, it's going to be so good if you plan on doing business in this market and in the long haul, especially for a lot of us that are doing deals in rural areas where,
Yeah.
my commercial, flip project that, is still going on just years later, of the national banks or, banks that I have relationships with, they won't lend in that rural of an area. So the only option really is some of these local, community banks or, maybe, different DSCR lenders or stuff, and stuff like that. So establishing that local banking relationship, just like the local realtor, is something that is just crucial for you to have long-term sustainable success in whatever market you're doing business in.
Yep. 100%. So I want to get into land and then contractor expectations. So rewinding the clock, one of the lots was great, got it at a significant discount, but the other one, not so much. And we were just kind of in a hurry to get the lots and get the project started. And I would rather delay an extra month and get the right land than buy the wrong lot. It wasn't terrible by any means, but there was more dirt work than I anticipated, which can be really expensive. Minor slopes can lead to a lot of work around grading, bringing in soil, putting in French drains, and or retaining walls potentially. We didn't have to go that far. But it depends where you're building. There's places that have topography. There's nothing you can do about it. But in somewhere as flat as Pueblo West, or I think about where I'm doing a lot of business just with land in eastern North Carolina, where it's very, very flat, take the time to just get a flat lot, if feasible. It makes such a difference. It makes the project so easy. And wasn't an issue on these two, but have someone dig some test holes. These two were soft dirt. Excavation was really easy, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of lots in Pueblo West covered in shale where your excavation costs can go through the moon if you didn't know that. Or going down to the southeast if you're building down there. Of course, you got to watch out for soils that won't allow for conventional septic. Your septic costs can double or even more potentially. So do the soil testing ahead of time. Have your contractor walk the lot, drill some holes, have a soil scientist if need be, and make sure you're buying the right land. I mean, this should be so obvious, but again, I was a little bit flippant with one of the lots and then definitely caused a bit more dirt work and just more than anything, a lack of desirability because people looked at it and there was a house higher next to it and they're just afraid, oh, over time, is this going to be a problem? Even though everything was approved and permitted, they still didn't like it. And so that lot was part of the problem.
And this applies to, beyond some of these more rural areas where you're on a well and septic or, community water and a septic system. If you're tying into sewer or water, just because a lot is conforming and considered buildable, it doesn't mean the actual soil is good for building. I mean, there's plenty of infill lots that I bought over the years where it's going to be really challenging for people to ever build on it because, one thing or another of wetlands or it's in a flood zone or, whatever. And for those of us that are acquiring a lot of these deals off market, like that's one of the reasons these sellers are so willing and, willing to sell their land to us at what is considered a discount. And it's nice when you're building yourself where, yeah, there might be increased construction costs related to whatever challenges there are with the land. So you being knowledgeable in it, it gives you the ability to actually, in your due diligence period, go and figure all this stuff out. And whenever you are a builder, you're able to negotiate a lot longer due diligence and inspection period because you're saying, hey, dude, we need our soil scientists, we need this person, that person to go do all this testing and everything. And that can help you negotiate, uh, a greater discount, assuming that the building costs are still feasible and don't become, something that just totally kills the deal. But when you're able to acquire land at a basis that's less than what you might be able to get on market, that's fantastic. And, uh, you know, definitely helps with bank financing at the end, when you're able to own the land free and clear, obviously, and purchase it, pretty cheap.
Yeah. One more point I'll make on that pertains to the whole conversation around land is watch out for fees from utility providers that you're not expecting. These are quarter acre infill lots, houses on both sides of both of them, power right there. Well, what do you know? The electric company decided last year to get rid of their credit. Normally, a lot of places, if you're starting or building a new home, creating a new account that they'll make money on every month, you get a credit, right? Because they have to usually put one power pole to extend to the back of your house, and then put the transformer in. Well, turns out they got rid of their credit, no more credits, and so it wasn't a huge expense, but it was an extra like 3 grand, 1,500 a lot that we weren't expecting. So just watch out for that. I mean, anyone that hasn't built, tap fees are very real for water and sewer. Looking out for that as well. They can be very, very high. I was anticipating them. I knew about them, so that didn't throw anything off, but just an FYI for people in general.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, just during this period, you really need to understand all the, soft costs associated with every aspect of construction I mean, from driveway permits, depending on, if you're building off a county road or something like that, that could be cheap or almost nothing, or it could be several $1,000s. And when you're looking at a profitability margin of, or like actual gross profit of, 20, 30,000, these $2,000, $5,000 permits and fees and everything like that, they really, really add up. So within your pro forma, and there's plenty of these spreadsheets you can download online, like just make sure every single aspect of it is covered whenever you're actually creating the budget for everything, because that could kill your numbers, especially when you're using bank financing and you have additional fees associated with it too.
Yep, 100%. Okay, let's talk about contractor expectation because this really feeds into the loan. So, as my partner and I were doing these builds, he was doing several others with a different contractor, and his contractor that he chose was more expensive. However, this guy has his construction process dialed into the day, where they were getting these builds done in 120 days to the T, no problem. And I look back and I think, okay, if we had had him build these and we still use the same debt that we use, we would have saved so much in interest, and we would have timed these better for this summer last year, that it would have been worth it. It would have been worth paying more. And my contractor didn't do anything wrong. They did actually come in on budget, so that's one thing. They were within like $1,000 of the budget, so that was great. But um, I had kind of a loose agreement with them because they did a build for me the prior year in 2024. They did a very good job. Got it done, I think, in 6 months flat. The contractual agreement we had said that they had a year, but it was kind of a handshake of, hey, it's not going to take anywhere near that. They delivered on that first one. Great. So I wasn't that worried about it. And then we got through all the way to the point where the drywall was in, or no, insulation was in, and we had been moving incredibly fast. And so I'm thinking, awesome, right? Went with the cheaper contractor. We're still getting this done very, very quickly. I think we were like 2.5 months in. We could potentially match the 120 days, even with the less expensive contractor. And then it kind of felt the second half was very, very slow. And it ended up taking over 6 months to get things completely done. Their plumber disappeared. I had to go help find a new plumber to finish. That really slowed us down. And, in hindsight, I if these were just build to rents and there was a little extra time that caused higher interest rate or a higher interest expense, but it's just amortized into a 30-year loan, it's not as big of a deal, right? But when you're selling spec homes, that starts to really eat into your margin. And so I should have done a better job of saying, hey, look, I know what we did in the past. I know the agreement, kind of the handshake where the contracts are the year, but we know we're going to do it faster. In hindsight, I should have said, look, if we're going to do spec homes to sell, we have to be able to get these done in 4 months, 4.5 max, or it just doesn't make sense. And I didn't do that. And so that caused the interest expense to go through the roof because it took forever to get done. And then we were past the busy season, and then we're trying to sell them in a slow fall season and winter. And that just really killed the project. And so the financing mistake was exacerbated by my mistake of not setting a better expectation for timeframes with the contractor, and then leading to a very protracted construction process.
The best thing obviously is in writing, like a very formal agreement between you and them, beyond the handshake, uh, where you want to operate in a capacity where it feels like a handshake deal, but everything is outlined so no one has any confusion of what the actual expectations are. Is that an agreement that you would recommend having your attorney actually draft up with the contractor? Or is this something that you feel like, you can just put in writing? I mean, even using ChatGPT or something like that to create a good contractor agreement, or is this something that the contractor usually is going to provide to you? Um, and I think it really depends on the level of contractor with a lot of the big, kind of commercial type people, where they already have this outlined as versus some of the smaller folks out there.
They should have some version of an agreement that you can use. And I mean, you know, have your attorney look at it, right? I'm not going to say not to do that, but it shouldn't be especially complex or difficult to read. Building a house or a duplex is not that complicated. So yeah, they should have one, and you should review it with your attorney. Also, make sure that it outlines who's doing what. This wasn't a problem for us on this build, but as long as we're talking about construction, are they doing everything? Are they expecting you to be doing some of the paperwork around applications, for permits, for driveway permits, etc.? Make sure that that's really, really clear. Are you only just dispersing draws when they send them to you? Make sure that's in writing as well. I've always done it where they're responsible for everything. There's a few things that as the owner you do have to sign. So there's a few notaries I had to do for different things, and then of course reviewing and dispersing the draws. But other than that, they handle everything. And make sure that you're not just assuming that and that it's actually in writing and you discuss it out loud.
So how often are you checking in on these contractors, both, via text or over the phone or email, as versus having someone go walk the job site and make sure all the work is actually being done? Is that like a formal cadence that you create, or kind of just as different, milestones are hit with the project?
I was doing it every week, and I had a friend that lived close by that would just check it every week. However, I should have done this in a more formal manner. And I like, again, referencing my partner who built additional homes with another builder and how he did it, having a formalized schedule of these are the milestones we're hitting at these dates. Then expectations are clear. And so you can say, oh, okay, it's, 60 days in and we don't have the drywall up. What's going on? This was on the schedule. And so everything you can to put, in fact, just as we're talking about this, as an addendum to the contract, if you can have expected time frame, that would be wise. And I think I'm going to do that going forward, where you can say, all right, 15 days in, we'll have the foundation done, framing and lumber will be up. 40 days in, whatever it might be. And there has to be some allowance for weather and just things happen, right? But it should be a pretty small margin because building just a single family home or a duplex is very, very simple. Plans. Let's talk about plans because I'm I'm lacking here. I'm not good with design or making something nice and pretty. And I just did the same plan approximately that sold really well from 2018 through 2024. And I didn't consider how much things had slowed in Colorado, how much more competitive it is, and how much how picky buyers were going to be. And in hindsight, there were little tweaks. If I had sat down with a designer or even just a realtor that's selling a lot of homes and done a better job of putting in nice little design tweaks to make it more appealing to buyers, it would have helped us a lot. And part of this is just landscaping. In the past, we had always just put 57 gravel around the drive and around the home, let people do their own landscaping. In hindsight, that was a mistake. Looking at how much inventory there is and the competition that's out there. Number two, the HVAC system. So much of Colorado is pushing towards electric, everything being electric. I'm sure you probably heard this, Mason. Um, and it's actually much more common out here in California. However, this was not a very progressive town, and people like what they're used to. And so we did, for the sake of cost savings, uh, all electric heating and AC, the mini split units, which they're great if you've used them. You can control the temperature in each room. You can have your bedroom a little warmer at night or a little cooler in the summer. Some people were turned off by that. And so I wouldn't have done that in hindsight. I think that turned away buyers. So just having been a little bit more intentional about the plan, adding a little more landscaping, I would have changed a few of the design pieces and parts, how we had things laid out in the kitchen and living room. And I wouldn't have done the electric heating and cooling because many people just weren't ready for that. And I think that would have served us really, really well, but I was just a little bit complacent there because this is the plan we've always used and it's worked, and that was a mistake in hindsight. Continuing along, I think the last big point, our big item to talk about is realtor expectations. And again, you've heard the word expectations a lot, and I made the mistake of making too many assumptions and just not doing better with expectations. The realtor I used had a lot of listings, definitely has sold a lot of real estate and has experience, but in hindsight, these were kind of meh listings to him. Definitely was not priority, definitely on the back burner for him. And the listing photos weren't very good, and they didn't put a lot of time into doing them. The listing wasn't very good. The social media side of the marketing was lacking. Really had to push and prompt them to improve that. And so I should have done a better job interviewing the realtor. And this is a guy I'd worked with a number of times, both on the buy. Actually, I hadn't used him on the sell side. He'd been the buyer, or he had been the seller's agent when I was buying a bunch of times, but I don't think I'd ever sold anything with him before. Um, and yeah, that just ended up being part of the problem. He wasn't that motivator, interested in the listings. He was slow. They didn't do a good job with photos and ultimately that affected our ability to sell these. So once again, I should have found someone that was really motivated, really interested in the listings, and set a clear expectation as to, all right, when will photos be up? When will you refresh them as we move through the construction process? What does your marketing plan look like between, social media, obviously the MLS, signs, open houses, etc. All that was kind of haphazard, and again, it led to us not selling the projects as quickly or as high as we wanted to.
And I think a good place to look for inspiration is a lot of the big home builders in whatever market you're operating in, they have agents that work exclusively for them, uh, for these new construction projects. And now they're not going to be the ones that actually list your home for you, but you can be able to say, hey, go look at this particular agent's social media, look at all her listings, and this is what I want from you. Are you able to do it? And then show me your track record of doing it. And I feel like it's challenging to, sometimes you're going to be looking at all the costs and all the fees and everything like that. And some brokers are going to offer you a big discount so you can list with them. And but at the end of the day, if those additional costs with listing with a good broker that actually understands new construction, has buyers that are looking, depending on what market and what community you work in, are they going to be posting it in Facebook groups that are relocation groups? Is there a military base close by? Are they advertising? Are they, do they work with veterans? Who is your buyer pool for this? And that agent should be able to speak to them. You're interviewing them. Like, you are hiring them for them to work for you. And you need to take it very, very seriously, because a great agent can make your life and pre-sell this for you, or you end up waiting months and months and don't really get anything.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. I should have known sooner when I proposed this to him up front. I said, look, construction costs are pretty stable compared to what they were for years. We can do a bunch of these and do them consistently, especially if you bring us pre-sales. We'll have these two homes in process that you can use to tour people. We can buy more lots, whether it's up north in the larger lots or in town with the smaller lots, and we can get a bunch of these going. I was trying to create what I had been taught, 8 years ago now. Um, and he just wasn't that excited by that in hindsight. And it should have told me, hey, this guy doesn't really care. He's got quite a lead funnel for listings. Um, and so, anyways, just another thought in hindsight. But to summarize, what ended up happening, so we had sold a very similar, in fact, a little bit smaller version of this house at the highest for 398 in 2022. At the lowest, there was a real dip in the summer of 23, and I sold one of these, I think it was for 365. That was the lowest I had ever sold it for. Um, Again, a little bit smaller. These ones were a little bit bigger and nicer. I think my contractor did a decent job with some of the finishes and little touches and such. And we put in really nice counters and so on and so forth. Well, we sold the one at 350 with a what, $7,500? No, an $11,700 seller concession. Ouch, that hurt. And then we ended up paying a total interest, 23,491 and 79 cents. And on the where was the I think the origination fee was like 5 grand. So we wasted a lot of money on interest. We had a realtor that didn't do a very good job and still paid them and this buyer's agent 3%. We also, of course, had that big seller credit, and we sold it at a much lower price. For reference, guys, I think the lowest new construction on the market comparable size is like 395. And so we still didn't lose money. And so it's so funny, like, obviously there's margin there. If we correct these issues, we have the nicer product that'll sell closer to the 380-ish mark because that's where we had it listed originally based on last year's comps. Um, there's certainly a market for this. There's certainly an opportunity to make 35, 40 grand per house if we were to correct all of these mistakes and get this done quicker, more efficiently, and with a slightly better plan. But we did it, and we still didn't lose money. Again, the other one we're just refinancing because the buyer backed out and we are out of time. But it's bittersweet in the sense that, I mean, with all the mistakes we made, the fact that we didn't lose money is great, and it's good to know that, yeah, there's margin in new construction. Because one more thing, that's with us paying a big fee to the general contractor. What if we just got a contractor to let us use their license for a small fee and then, did subbed it out ourselves? That's another opportunity for someone that really wants to do this at scale. So there's a lot of margin still in new construction, at least in this market in Colorado. We just made a lot of mistakes along the way, and
So your new construction projects, Dan, like are, I would say the end buyer, it's, I wouldn't call it a starter home exactly, but it's, an affordable product that most of middle class, within the demographic or, within the market that you're doing business in can afford. Do you think it makes sense for people to try and, assuming that the comps justify it, going into a higher price range into homes in kind of the 700 to $900,000 range, or, and everything is market dependent, or do you prefer this kind of more entry level buyer type product?
for this market, I prefer more the entry level, personally, but I think we could have done a better job even within that. So, perfect example, I pulled it up just so I can get the specifics correct. There's a builder I know personally because I've sold him a lot of land, and he did a similar spec down the street last year. It was about 150 square foot larger, and it had an extra garage space. So ours was 2, this one's 3, and he did do nicer finishes. It's definitely got nicer finishes, traditional, central heating and cooling, and he sold it at 430. 430 quickly too. I mean, like, before it was even done. And that was last fall when it was quite slow in Colorado. And so this just illustrates the point to me that there are lots of buyers. They just would rather a more expensive and nicer product. Not that much more expensive, not that much larger. But I mean, again, for 150 square feet and one extra garage space, he sold it for what amounts to be $90,000 higher because taking into account the concession we had. And so I think we could have done a better job also of going a little more premium as opposed to going a little more entry level.
And that's why it's so crucial of not making assumptions of what you think buyers will want and looking at all of the comparable data that's available, because there are certain things that like will kill a deal, and you thought you were going to save money on, not adding this feature, not adding that feature, changing the layout in this way or that way, where if you had done it, more buyers come to the table because it is, when you're looking at a 30-year loan, that price doesn't change too much in terms of actual affordability whenever it's, a $20,000 upgrade that you can make, 40,000 extra on. So all different things to consider. But Dan, as we move towards the end, what else do you want to leave the audience with related to this?
I think just really driving home the idea of not doing anything half-assed and making sure that one person in the process fully owns and is committed to making that project as efficient and profitable as it can be. Because, look, all of these things are really simple. These aren't major tweaks. They're really simple. And myself and my partner on the projects were just distracted with all the other things we were doing. Oh, these are just simple spec homes. We've done these over and over again. I'm not that worried about it. We just didn't stay on top of it. We didn't stay on top of the contractor, the financing. All of this could have been fixed in hindsight, and neither of us really owned it, and so we didn't. And potentially, you could set these up where the contractor is financially incentivized as well. Maybe they take a portion of the profit, and then they could be the one that's really strongly taking ownership of the project. But someone's got to own it, whether it's this, whether it's your project in Pagosa or a simple subdivision. Someone's got to be fully on top of it so that this doesn't happen.
Yep. A lot of this stuff, people will try to, sell you a course as if it's a side hustle that you can do completely passively. And there's truth to that if you are willing to hire someone to do it for you. But it does take a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of time and a lot of money, especially in reserves, because projects typically will, you just build a contingency into the budget. That's it's a line item on the pro forma of, anywhere from a 5 to 10 to 15%. The better the contractor, the lower the contingency needs to be, but you need to budget it because things go wrong. It just happens.
Right.
And if you are not spending a tremendous amount of time focusing on every aspect of the project, you will miss stuff and your contractor will miss stuff and it will cost you money in the long run.
Yeah. 100%. I think that's a good place to leave it. Anything else you want to add to that, Mason?
Nope, I don't think so. There's a lot of ways to make money in new construction, a lot of ways to lose money in new construction. So stay on top of it. And we hope this episode was beneficial to you guys. So this is Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkos with the Big Picture Blueprint signing off.